Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sports Site Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about learning, about skill acquisition, and we're going to be doing that with Dr. Thomas Simpson. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to having a chat today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. As I say, we're going to be talking about skill acquisition, we're going to be talking about learning, and we're going to be unpacking one of your papers around something called optimal theory, which I don't think we've spoken about before in the podcast, actually. So excited to talk about that. But I'd love to know more about you, Thomas. Tell us about your work and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm currently a lecturer in skill acquisition and motor learning. A little bit of at Edge Hill University, probably should clarify that. So a little bit of sort of background about sort of where I've come from. And again, just mentioned Edge Hill University there. Well, I've been at Edge Hill University since my undergraduate days, so 10 years ago now. Then moving into a master's by research again at Edge Hill University. Particularly, that study was looking at how different focus of attention instructions, external focus, internal focus instructions, influence the quiet eye, which I know you've spoke about regularly on the show as well.
Yep.
And from there, I then carried on at Edge Hill again, doing a GTA-funded PhD looking at this optimal theory of motor learning, particularly how it relates to children's motor performance, motor learning, and particularly what a lot of PE teachers doing in terms of their instructional behaviours that they give, because we know that's an important part of learning, of skill development. So what are PE teachers doing and how can we optimise those instructional behaviours? So recently as 2 years ago, completed that PhD. So hopefully getting to the end of publishing all the work from a PhD in the next couple of weeks. Managed to stay on at Edge Hill and get a job doing a lecture in skill acquisition and motor learning. So currently teaching on the first year sport and exercise psychology module and a third year applied skill acquisition in sport module, which I've really enjoyed doing. So it's nice to be able to bring that research through my master's and my PhD and bring it into my teaching, and for that to be recognised in the university, particularly during my PhD. Should mention, shout out to some of my supervisors who have helped me through that, who have contributed to the paper that we're going to talk about today as well. So Dr. Paul Ellison, Dr. Evelyn Carnegie, and Dr. David Marchant. And then along the way, some extra help from Dr. Lorcan Cronin as well.
For our international listeners, where is Edge Hill University?
Yeah, so Edge Hill's this university in a small market town of Ormskirk in Lancashire. So a small, quiet market town, and they plonked the big university in there. It's a nice, all in one campus. Everything's there for you to use. But yeah, just nestled sort of between Ormskirk's nestled between sort of Liverpool and Manchester, broadly speaking. It's closer to Liverpool than it is to Manchester. But yeah, just a small market town, but a good university, the presence. And I've been there for over 10 years now, so I can't have any complaints about the university itself, and the town itself in Ormskirk is amazing.
Being from the area, does that make you a Liverpool or a Manchester supporter? Or neither?
I'm a Wigan Athletic fan.
Wigan, of course, yeah.
So someone's got to support them, and I'll carry the flag there.
Well, I must admit that was a terrible comment from me, because one of the most remarkable things. Well, let me explain myself there. One of the most remarkable things about that area that you're in is it's populated with so many incredible football teams, isn't it? Soccer teams. It is just extraordinary, the number of football teams that have a wonderful history in the game, just from this area. I don't know how many square miles, how many clubs within, 50 square miles, but it's just extraordinary, isn't it?
Oh, it's crazy amount of teams, and that's one of the struggles for teams like Wigan, Bolton, Accrington, Stanley, Blackburn, Preston, is that because you've got them big Manchester and Liverpool teams, you grow up seeing them on TV and supporting them. So unless you go to the games, you don't really become immersed in what them sort of lower league clubs are about, and the atmosphere it's about, and the trials and tribulations that come with it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You mentioned in your brief biography there motor learning. Um, for those listening in, what is, because I think most people would say, "Yeah, okay, skill acquisition to acquire skill." But when people think of motor learning, I think it evokes images of cars. What are we talking about when we're thinking about motor learning? Because I know everybody listening in who's invested in sport is invested in motor learning. So can you unpack this a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. So motor learning, broadly speaking, when we're talking about motor, we're related to motor skills. So sort of physical skills and skill acquisition. So the two terms are synonymous, so to speak. I guess with motor learning, we're interested in those processes that help us to learn skills, both from what we call a motor perspective, so a physical perspective, skills that we can see, but also from a cognitive and perceptual standpoint as well, in terms of what's going on in the brain and how does that interact with the skills that we're learning. So yeah, so motor learning, skill acquisition, the sort of one of the same terms, so to speak. But you see that banded about differently in the literature, and even I swap between that, and even that's why I've got them both in my job title, because well, which one do we go with?
Well, they're interchangeable, aren't they? And you mentioned your job title. There's lecture and skill acquisition, motor learning, motor control. But interestingly, you also mentioned in your biography lecturing on the sport and exercise psychology course at Edge Hill. It sounds like me, you believe in the strong relationship between the disciplines. You believe in the relationship between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no value in viewing these things as separate entities. No point of just looking at the cognitive. There's no point just looking at the perceptual or the social or the motor factors, and putting those things together is particularly important to give us that holistic view of well, what's going on, what makes an elite performer elite, what helps a child to develop skills during physical education, and from an exercise standpoint, how do we get people engaged in that physical activity? We have to consider sort of all these points from a holistic standpoint.
Realistic is such a great word. It's making me think. I mean, as we speak now, we've released an episode of the Sports Psych Show speaking with an academic who's heavily invested in the systemic side of sport, complexity in sport, and systemism versus reductionism. So, very much speaks to what you're talking about there.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
holistic. This is the system influences the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Um, we're here today to unpack a paper. The paper is entitled The Use of Optimal Instructions and Feedback in Physical Education Settings. And it's a paper you've written alongside, as you've mentioned, some of your supervisors, Lorcan Cronin, Paul Ellison, Thomas Hawkins, Evelyn Carnegie, and David Marchant. So you have some wonderful co-authors there. And I'm keen to unpack this. But let's begin at the beginning here because the word optimal, I mean, those listening in will not be seeing this, obviously, but the word optimal in the title is in capitals. So obviously, it's not optimal instructions and feedback. Well, maybe it is optimizing instructions and feedback, but there feels like there's a little bit more here. Talk to me about optimal.
yeah, of course. So optimal, as you say, is this acronym. So optimizing performance through intrinsic motivation and attention for learning. So quite a mouthful. But broadly speaking, what this theory tries to do is capture, again, from this sort of holistic point of view, is that this idea of motor learning isn't just based on motor aspects. It's focused on this cognitive, affective, social, perceptual, motor elements combined, and that's what influences motor learning. And particularly, it focuses on what are some of the motivational things that we could be including in our practice, and particularly where we can focus our attention. So it's very much looking at the interaction between motivation and attention. And what the authors, Gabby Wulf and Rebecca Lewthwaite, have tried to do is move away from this idea that humans are just information processes. We just take in information and we output a response. And so what they try to capture is, well, where's motivation in that? And we need to consider how motivation influences that skill learning. So it starts to pick on aspects of the self-determination theory. So the three basic psychological needs within that, so competence, autonomy, and relatedness. But then also building on a lot of Gabby Wulf's work and bringing in that then benefits of that external focus of attention. Just to come back and sort of clarify then what the optimal theory is in terms of what are the factors that they've particularly chosen to focus on. So there's three important factors. So two motivational, and they are enhanced expectancies and autonomy support. So in this theory, they're related to if we enhance somebody's expectancies and we support their autonomy, that'll enhance their intrinsic motivation. And that, in theory, will lead to enhanced goal action coupling, which is speak for saying we'll have an enhanced focus on the task goal, whether that be shooting a basketball free throw or actually making contact with the ball in golf, which is something that I'm not very good at.
I played it professionally and I wasn't very good at doing that either.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very tough game. Very tough. And the final factor then is this external focus of attention. So very much when we're practicing, when we're learning a skill, where should we focus in our attention? So that age-old question, what should we be thinking about? And particularly this theory focuses on this external focus of attention. So it's based on this body of research over the last 20, 30 years that if we focus on the intended movement outcome or effect, so again, using those examples, focusing on getting the ball in the basket, focusing on the club head or making contact with the ball in golf, leads to better motor performance or better performance of that skill, better learning of that skill than an internal focus of attention where we're thinking about what our arms are doing, what our legs are doing, what our muscles are doing, and really thinking internally. So this theory then tries to combine those three factors together, so that autonomy support, enhanced expectancies, and external focus. And it suggests that when these three factors are combined, our motor performance is optimized. So if we don't have any of these factors, we can still perform well and learn a skill. If we have one of those factors, well, we should see better performance and better learning. But if we combine two or three of those, we get this further optimized performance, which then leads to enhanced learning. And then when we experience that success from learning, we're getting more enhanced expectancies in this virtuous cycle. So I'll say that's the broad premise of the optimal theory on that level.
I love it. I love it. And such a great and succinct explanation. I'm going to check my understanding here. So I want to reflect back what I think I've heard you say in my own very simple tones. So my understanding here is that if we strip things back, if we strip coaching back, coaching sport back, we might think of a coach instructing an individual what to do, how to move, for example, what to move, how to move. But actually, what we can pretty safely say is that a sports competitor, a sports learner, is a little bit more dynamic than that. Human beings are a little bit more dynamic in as much as they're not just, let's say, information process beings. They don't just process information that are given to them in some kind of vacuum. Actually, there's a bit more to us than that. And so when we think about learning sport, learning the movements and the actions associated with sport, what's important here is to recognize that the person in front of us engages in cognition, so thinking processes. They also experience affect or feeling and emotion. Perceptual factors are influences, how somebody perceives the world, and also what they're actually looking at, and social, psychosocial factors impacts, socio-cultural, socio-environmental factors influence somebody's motor learning. And this optimal theory therefore studies strip back here motivation and attention with relation to motor learning. And you've mentioned three factors that are constantly influencing the capacity to learn motor skills in an optimal manner: enhanced expectations, autonomy support, which very much links with self-determination theory, Deci and Ryan's theory there that we've spoken about numerous times on the show, and this notion of an external focus of attention as opposed to an internal focus of attention, which again we have spoken quite a few times about on the show. And so one could argue that if a coach incorporates these notions of enhanced expectation, autonomy support, and external focus of attention, you're giving the people that you are coaching a better opportunity to optimize their motor performance. Am I reasonably on the same page as you?
I think you've nailed it there. Yeah. There's anything more for me to say? Yeah, great explanation.
New lecturing job at Edge Hill for me coming up.
Definitely.
All right. So we've unpacked optimal instruction, and it would be remiss of me not to reinforce the two names that you mentioned there, who I've actually seen present combined once at the PGA in Birmingham, England, and that is Gabby Wulf and Rebecca Lewthwaite. Love both of their work, particularly love the work of Rebecca Lewthwaite on choice. But I know Gabby Wulf is she's the number one when it comes to this stuff, right?
Oh, definitely head honcho. That's all from
The boss.
it's all from her work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know so many followers of her work. She's a real, well, she is, the pioneering voice in this area. So, hey, look, let's start to unpack this paper, the use of optimal instructions and feedback in physical education settings. So, physical education settings, not academy football or academy sport or first team sport, but physical education settings. So it is sports. But so can you tell me about the genesis of this paper? Why this paper? Why do you want to study instructions and feedback with relation to these three factors?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, the idea for this paper was well, for part of my PhD work. So, the PhD, my PhD broadly was interested in, well, how do we optimize performance and learning for children? Um, and again, we found that was compared to adults, there was a lack of research looking at these three different optimal factors in children's motor performance and motor learning research, but also a lack of research combining those three factors. So I knew at some point that we wanted to look at some of those combinatory effects, but at the same time, we didn't actually know what PE teachers actually did in PE. So it's all well and good me going to we've got all this research that says yes, this should be enhancing expectancies, supporting autonomy, promoting external focus, and this is how you can do it, and this is how we've done it in the research. Just for the PE teacher to go, well, we can't do that. That's not viable. So the first idea that we thought was, well, let's go see what they're doing. So in effect, we uh, went into the schools. There's a dictaphone, got them wired up, got them all mic'd up, and said, just go out and teach your normal PE lessons. We started off doing that with the idea also to sit in the lessons and observe some of the non-verbal behaviours as well. Unfortunately, as we started getting going with this, that COVID-19 kicked in. I can't believe I'm still talking about this now. COVID-19 kicked in, so we had to get rid of some of this observational types, sort of in-person observational type stuff as well. So we very much looked at, okay, well, instructions and feedback, what are going on? How are PE teachers trying to provide these instructional behaviours to help children learn in these PE settings? So that was broadly what we were aiming to do. So we got them mic'd up, go and teach a PE lesson, and then go through and then thematically analyse the data moving forward. So as we started to sort of get into some of this research and we started to see some of the data coming back, on one, I'd never done any work like this before, and sort of observational research and transcription, and then realised, wow, this is a serious amount of work to be done.
I can imagine transcribing a lot what you've heard from the dictaphone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. Luckily, there was nothing else to do in lockdown, so the days were consisted of just that.
Yeah.
But very much as we started getting into the data, we realised, well, this is going to be more difficult than we think, because what's in the research in terms of how the enhanced expectancies provide autonomy support, less so for the external focus instructions, but it looks nothing like in the real world what it does in the experimental projects, which we thought, oh well, this is quite interesting to dig into. So it took a little bit of a lot of rounds of revision to try and work out, well, what is enhancing expectancies? What is autonomy support in this? How do we defer this just from language alone? So in effect, we looked at nearly over 5,000 different statements, which again took a very long period of time. But compared to previous studies, which have particularly looked at high performance sport, we found the opposite findings to high performance sports. So in high performance sports, so the work of Mason and colleagues, Halperin and colleagues, they were finding that, well, these elite sports coaches typically use more controlling type behaviours. In some cases, provide more negative feedback to their athletes. And it's suggested in these papers that they're trying to get some control over the situation. So in this performance aspect, a coach wants control, and absolutely understandable. When things aren't going well, negative feedback to try to motivate, try to highlight errors, and try to, in effect, control the outcomes of the game.
Yeah.
What we found was the opposite of that. We found that, well, PE teachers provide much more of what we would call this more optimal type behaviour, if we're using the acronym. So much more externally focused instructions, much more autonomy supportive instructions and feedback, and more instruction and feedback that enhanced a learner's expectations, made them feel that they could perform successfully. So yeah, so broadly speaking, that was sort of the main gist of the work, so to speak.
I'd like to get into the weeds here.
Yeah.
Because you posed the question yourself there. You wanted to find out, well, what is the language used around enhance expectations? What does the coach behavior look like, if you'd like? What is the language around autonomy support? So what, within the audio data that you unpacked, for those listening in, what are good examples of instructions and feedback around enhanced expectations and or being autonomy supportive? What words, what sentences, what's actually being said?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify before I sort of mention some of them instructions, that the idea of the enhanced expectancies is to make that individual feel like they can succeed on the subsequent performance. So we use our basketball free throw example. I performed the task, I've got some feedback, and now my expectations are enhanced. So I should be able to perform more successfully next time round. I'll continue that success. So in terms of what we've seen in terms of this enhanced expectancies, instruction and feedback, we've seen a lot of positive feedback being related. And that seemed to be the primary way that PE teachers were conveying this enhanced expectancies information. So for example, statements like, that's better, last time you were at head height. So where this is talking about a basketball dribbling task. So this statement here, that's better, last time you were at head height, suggests that on the initial practice, bouncing the ball, it's going up to head height, not the ideal way to control that. And then they've continued to practice, and the teachers recognise that. So they're giving them positive feedback and saying, well, that's better than what it was previously, and that this is what your mistake was in that sense. And in theory, that should make that individual, that child, feel good about themselves and reinforce that behaviour and that height of dribbling. Okay? And then even some of the other comments. So, for example, keep going, Ben, unlucky. So, framing errors, not in a way that you need to be doing it this way, that was wrong. Saying, well, that was unlucky, that was down to it was just an unlucky performance. It was a poor performance, not because you're bad at the task, but because that was just unlucky at that moment in time. And if you keep practicing, your luck will get better. So, trying to frame that mindset in such a way that, okay, inherently, you might not be very good at basketball. You might never practice it before. But that doesn't mean that you're never going to get better at it. So if you frame that mindset in that way, and we provide, and PE teachers framing feedback in that way, as they were in this study. So let's say unlucky, that was unlucky, keep going, keep practicing. That's encouragement, making them feel good about themselves. Well, it's not because of my performance, it's because of I was a bit unlucky that time. Again, general feedback such as just nice dribbling, reinforcing that good behaviour. So we had this balance between some really simple type statements, so very much like, so nice dribbling, yeah, to a little bit more detail such as, oh, well controlled, that was a good use of another part of your foot, well done. So really a little bit more detail about technique per se. So they were some of the examples that we pulled out of some of those particular comments on that.
Right. So essentially, what I'm hearing is language that orients players' attention to what's gone well in the previous rep or action, in order to help them feel like they're able to accomplish that rep, that task in the next rep. Right. So, I mean, I'm a big believer in a big part of a big chunk of coaching, essentially directing attention and cultivating attention. So this makes sense to me. What I know is there will be many listening in who will go, okay, but we've always known that you know being positive is important with young people in sports, even the people who perhaps don't necessarily practice what they preach there. Well, it's being positive. But what the number one thing I'm hearing you say here is perhaps coaches, I know we're talking about PE teachers here, but if I also broaden it out to coaches, because there sometimes feels like a pressure to develop the kind of skills synonymous with performance, we can be somewhat oriented towards correcting what's gone wrong rather than helping players identify what's going well. That's, I suppose, my first sort of comment stroke question for you. But then I would also say what I'm starting to understand here is I'm guessing this is going to be broadened out towards a more sophisticated lens of communication around, well, I'm going to orient someone towards what's going well with that last rep or the last reps. And I also have to help them keep an external focus of attention as I communicate. So I'm sort of inviting you to build on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, the optimal theory, the way it positions the three factors, that autonomy, support, enhanced expectancies, and an external focus. On the schematic of the optimal theory, it all points to this idea of when we have these three things in place, it increases our focus on the task goal and reduces the focus on the self. So, in effect, it's what it's trying to get you to do is focus more externally on intended movement outcomes or effects, or on the goal of the performance, and stop thinking internally and inward about how I'm controlling that movement, what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong necessarily per se. Keeping that focus on problem solving to a degree, achieving that task goal. Yeah, so in effect, what we're trying, what some of that. So, for example, as I mentioned, sort of nice and accurate, Josh. Well done. Keep going, Ben. Unlucky. That's better. Last time you're at head height in terms of some of this basketball dribbling. Yeah, it's very much saying, well, focus on keeping the ball at that height. You're doing a good job at that. So, just by giving us that feedback, it's very much not just having that potential motivational effect. It's highlighting this external focus and keep focused on that. And to broaden that out a little bit more, this is something that I followed up on as part of some of my PhD research. So suggested that there clearly is these interacting factors between the two. So we're not just looking at enhanced expectancies. That's just motivation. It does impact attention. So for example, one of my other PhD studies was looking at, to come away from enhanced expectancies a little bit, was autonomy, supportive instructions, and external focus versus an external focus and more controlling language used within those instructions. And what we found in that study was that condition that had external focus and autonomy support, those children in that study reported more externally focused thoughts than the children in the more in the external focus but controlling language type behavior. So the instructions framed in such a way as that you need to focus on this, you need to be performing the skill in a certain way, versus that more autonomy supportive approach where you might want to try this, you might want to focus on this might help you improve that performance. So similar to the enhanced expectancies, when we can almost motivate somebody's attention in effect. If that thing becomes then important to that individual, then they're going to pay more attention to it, and that's an important aspect of it in PE, particularly. So we need to be focusing on the height of the ball when we're dribbling around in basketball. So if I can make that into a way that's motivating, if you keep it at, for example, I'll broaden out a little bit here again. If I keep that ball at waist height as I'm dribbling around, and the teacher notices that whoever's got the best dribbling technique can have first pick when they call to play the games, in terms of choosing teams and offering choice in that way. So very much that enhanced expectancies when we feel more confident about the way we're going to perform and about how we're going to perform successfully, that can lead to us focusing our attention more on that task goal.
So actually bringing in that autonomy supportive form of instruction, what I'm hearing you say there is offering choice, making suggestions, giving options. These this these very much align with this notion of autonomy support, rather than just simply the classic telling somebody what to do, or using actually quite extreme language. You need to do this. It's offering options and choice, and I suppose that is drawing on self-determination theory again. Providing autonomy, helping somebody feel that they have that choice, very much lends itself to someone actually trying some of the suggestions that you're making. It kind of draws on this notion of, in psychology, there's a popular term: I insist, you resist. I insist, you resist. So the more we insist, the more that someone can resist. Whereas if we actually provide that autonomy supportive environment where we're just offering choice and options, and somebody might actually take up those options and that choice.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's particularly important in a physical education setting as well to have those choices, because it's, again, in the United Kingdom, physical education is a compulsory subject. Yet all children have to do that, and you've got this. So within a physical education lesson, you're going to have different levels of motivation across that continuum. You have people who really love PE or a particular sport that they're doing in PE. And you might have somebody who's just got absolutely no interest whatsoever, does not want to be there, would much rather forget the kit and sit on the sidelines. So about giving those options out as a teacher. Well, okay, well, these are the tasks that we're going to be doing. We're going to be focusing on basketball today, for example. I'll stick with that theme of basketball. We're going to be doing some basketball today, but I'm going to give you a choice in terms of what you want to do. If you want, so we're going to do some dribbling, we're going to do some shooting, we're going to do some passing. So get into your groups and you can choose whichever task that you want to do first. You can choose the groups that you want to work in. I want to practice with my friends. That could be more motivating for some individuals, particularly you've got sort of maybe more extrinsically motivated, for example. You've not got that inherent love for basketball or physical education, but I'm playing with my mates, and that's motivating. That's getting me engaged. That's helping my skills to develop, whether I know it or not. My skills are developing. That might get me to play more sport outside of school. That might help improve these longer term sort of engagement in physical activity across the lifespan. So we've got this longer development there as well. And one thing I did note on some of the early observations that we did, I found it quite funny. There was it was a female football lesson, so a girls PE lesson focusing on football, and there was a group of 3 girls who they weren't particularly interested in doing football, but when they were allowed to choose the colour of the bib to wear, can we choose our own bib? Oh, they were all over it. They were really excited. Get the bib on and they're into it. They had simple, irrelevant choice, such as that, got those, such as a bib colour, for example, got that person involved in that learning process, in that setting, in a setting where they're going to be able to learn those skills. And I think that's important from an autonomy perspective in terms of offering those choices. But on the flip side, we've also got the language that the teachers use. So obviously, if we can offer choice all day long, we know that's effective for learning to some degree, and then also from a broader motivational perspective. But again, a teacher framing things in such a way, as the term that you used, if the more I insist, the more you resist. Or you might want to try this, you might want to have a go at this. Maybe think about doing these things that might be useful for performance. That might help you learn this skill. It might help you overcome this error that you're stuck on. So just being more suggestive and making that individual feel like it's going to be their choice just through language alone. And this is it's almost the illusion of control, in effect, in a PE lesson. you as the teacher still have this control, but you're offering autonomy in these different parts by the language that you use. And another, as I'm talking, maybe a little bit of a ramble here, but in terms of something that's not really spoke about in the optimal theory, but more so in some of the self-determination research, is this idea of providing meaningful rationales as a way to provide autonomy support. I think that's particularly important in physical education as well, and that we do see that come through in the study as well, in terms of, well, why are we doing this? Well, why are we learning this skill? When am I ever, so again, particularly for somebody who's no interest in basketball, for example, when am I ever going to go out and shoot a basketball in real life? Well, trying to put that perspective in terms of, well, you're doing this because of X, Y, and Z, or we're learning it in this way because that's the most helpful way to learn it. We're not doing it this way that your coach outside of in your Sunday league club might do it, but we're doing it this way because this incorporates the whole class. It helps us to develop communication skills, etc. Helps develop those life skills as well as actually learning those physical skills. So I think that for me, coming off the back of this study, that is the opportunity where PE teachers can really optimize their language in terms of being more autonomy supportive. Even though in the paper they definitely do that, we know they're doing that, but there's lots of opportunity to be more sophisticated in that approach and have that very much a systematic approach to, well, how am I going to speak? Having thoughtful communication with the students beyond, we're going to learn this skill.
I really like what you said there around meaning, meaning driving motivation. Why are we doing what we're doing, and then perhaps broadening out the interpretation of what we're doing. We're not just playing basketball. Actually, this can help you in a whole raft of things in life. It makes me think, and as you've been speaking, you know, for the whole podcast, it's making me think of the relationship between optimal theory and mindsets. I mean, growth mindsets and fixed mindsets, which, you know, it has obviously complexity to it, and it has some support and lacks some support in certain areas. But ultimately, Carol Dweck's work, it's the meaning that pupils make in education settings around their experiences, you know, the meaning that they have around their successes and their failures. And, you know, it really resonates with me that the meaning somebody has around doing a physical activity task in PE is going to influence their motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, like moving away from this idea of, yeah, I'm very much interested in motor learning and skill acquisition from that point, but we've got to consider that from a physical education perspective, is that, well, physical education isn't just about skill learning; it is about that physical literacy, so to speak, giving that person the skills, the mindset, the confidence to go and deal with challenges that they're faced with in everyday life, and that is what physical education is about. And I think that's an area that from biased perspective of me talking about the optimal theory, but could be explored further in the optimal theory. So even where we're not seeing these clear improvements from these are our optimal interventions per se, well, is it having a motivational impact? How does that motivational impact then have an impact further into the future in terms of some of them physical activity behaviours that we might see?
Before we, you know, draw some conclusions here from this work, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper, just for a few minutes, into external focus of attention, if possible, because I think it's easy to miss some of the detail here. Could you give us some examples, whether it's drawn from the research project or from elsewhere, some examples of an external focus of attention, or instructions and feedback around external focus of attention? Because I think it's a term that can be used, but, you know, I think many listening in will go, well, what do you mean by that? What does that look like? Could you give us some examples?
Yeah, of course. So So this external focus of attention, again, is very much focused on the idea of focusing on the intended movement, outcome, or effect. So the key word there is intended, that we're intentionally trying to perform a skill in a certain way or achieve an end goal. So, for example, an external focus might be focus on keeping the club head square throughout the throughout putting in golf putting, throughout
Yep.
the stroke.
Yep.
So focus on keeping the putter head square. It might be focusing on generating backspin on the ball so it rebounds off the backboard in basketball.
Mm-hmm.
It might be something as simple as ensuring you've got a lower bounce on the ball, which was, again, something that some of the teachers spoke about in terms of the basketball aspect. It might be focus on trying to get the ball further off the floor. So the intention here is to lift the ball away from the floor. So no reference to the body there, and very much focused on an element or an intended end goal. And what you'll see in the research is some really specific instructions. So focus on keeping the putter head square. Where then in sort of the applied setting, about these physical education, for example. So how long can you keep the ball off the floor as a task to do, as an instruction for a task? How long can you keep the ball off the floor? It's very broad, but the focus there is keeping the ball off the floor. That is the intended goal, and there's no reference to the body. On the flip side of that, we've then got this internal focus of attention instruction, which is very much this focus on the movements itself and the bodily aspects of that movement, how I'm controlling that action. So for our golf example, it might be focus on keeping the shoulders over the ball. I'm going to butcher my knowledge of golf here to someone who used to be a pro. It might be focused on the actual movement of the arms, the pendulum motion of the arms.
Yep.
It might be focusing on particular grip. In basketball, for example, it might be focusing on flicking the wrist or flicking the wrist at the top of the shot to try to generate that backspin. So it's very much focused on what are these different body parts doing. In our physical education examples, it might be focusing on extending your elbows when passing the ball. Focus on leaning back and getting your foot under the ball, for example. So it's very much focused on or reference to a body part. And what the research would generally tell us, again, there is some recent research to try to challenge this idea, is that if we focus externally, we're more likely to see more successful performance, and that's likely to lead to more successful learning than if we focus internally on our bodily movements. And the thinking behind that is that when we focus on the task goal, an external focus, the body self-organizes, the motor system self-organizes. We don't use conscious motor control, and those actions are performed almost automatically. Whereas when we're thinking internally about what have I got to do in my arms, what have I got to do in my feet, what have I got to do in my legs, what have I got to do in my body, twisting and turning, well, that starts to interfere. This conscious control of the system starts to interfere with the motor system and can disrupt that automaticity and make that movement look a little bit more clunky, per se, a little bit less efficient, and ultimately less effective, is what the research would tell us in this area.
I'd love you to close things out here. What are the main conclusions drawn from this topic, and where to next?
Yeah, so in the paper, again, the main findings of the results were that PE teachers generally have these more optimal instructional behaviours. So they tend to provide more externally focused instruction feedback, are more autonomy supportive, and generally enhance expectations. And that's compared to elite settings, as we already discussed, which might be more controlling in nature due to those pressures of performance outcomes. And what we suggested in this paper particularly was that actually it might not necessarily be that these PE teachers might not necessarily know that they're instructing these behaviours because they know about the optimal theory. The chances are they don't. They might have come across some of these concepts before in the teacher training and previous education, But it might be actually that the context is driving a lot of these instructional behaviours. Again, as we mentioned. So if I go back just to the couple of papers that I mentioned, Mason and Halperin, so boxing and Australian football rules. So in those papers, they found that actually there was more autonomy supportive behaviours, or there's more positive feedback when the boxer or the team were winning. So it might just have been that, that athlete was doing well, so I can be more positive in my behaviours. And actually, in physical education, we're very much focused on this development. It's a developmental setting. We're trying to develop the whole person from the motor skill side of things to the motivational side of things. So it might be actually the context is driving the instructional behaviours. So I'm going to be more positive. I'm going to be more understanding when you make errors. So I'm going to be much more autonomy supportive in that way. I'm going to provide you lots of positive feedback when you're doing well. I'm not really going to grill you if you're not doing something well, because I'm not expecting you to go and compete at an elite standard. I just want you to be able to learn this skill. So actually, the fact that we might have seen more of these positive behaviours is just because of the developmental nature of physical education. And even then, from a broader standpoint in this paper, we see that PE teachers teach to a large group of students. And actually, it might be easy for as me as a teacher to provide an external focus instruction to the whole class. Well, I want you to get the ball in the net. Simply put, in basketball, that's easy for me to say. Crack on with the task. And then as I come round and talk to you about what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, I can provide some feedback that might be externally focused and internally focused in nature. So I think that the finding from this paper is very much that the context appears to be driving the instructional behaviours, and we as researchers going to research in this field need to be aware of what's actually being said in these fields to inform our experimental designs. So we're using instructions that very much look like what they do in practice. And just one final point on that is that, again, we looked at these three different factors in terms of these instructional behaviours, and in terms of, well, okay, there was autonomy supportive, enhanced expectancies, provided external focus. But the optimal theory talks about putting these things together. And PE teachers did that at times, but at other times provided what we would call, or what we termed, non-optimal. So the opposite, so internal focus. Did they diminish expectancies? So things like negative feedback, or were they quite controlling in the language that they used? And actually, what we found was actually, well, both of those behaviours were going on. So sometimes in the same sentence. So it might be, that was a really good shot, or you need to focus on bending your knees more. Well, there's no research on, or very little research on, well, how does that impact learning and motivation? Because we've got two conflicting ideas.
Yeah.
So for me, the research needs to go with, well, more of this work to understand why PE teachers use the instructions that they do use, and I know there's work going on around that. With one of my co-authors, Thomas Hawkins, trying to develop this further, use some interview approaches, but at the same time testing these theoretically inconsistent instructional behaviours. So they are external focus with your controlling type language, and I think that's what we need to dig into a little bit more, whilst appreciating the type of language that's used in the real world.
Absolutely fascinating, and I'm passionate about competitors, sporting competitors, having frameworks, playbooks, structures, guidelines for engaging and learning and competing. And it's the same for coaches. I think these kinds of theories, research-driven theories, offer coaches the opportunity to really underpin their coaching, their teaching, with a theoretically oriented set of solutions. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. I know you will have tapped the interest of those listening in. If I may ask, how can people find you, follow you, and get in touch?
Yeah, of course. So I'm on LinkedIn, Thomas Simpson, and also on Twitter at Thomas __Simpson, or X as it's called these days. Still call it Twitter. Or you can contact me by email at any point. So my email's simpsont@edgehill.ac.uk.
Brilliant. Thomas, thank you so much for today.
Thank you very much. Cheers for having me on. Thank you very much.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast episode, and I hope you did too. I'd love to hear what you think of the Sports Social Show, and if you do have any suggestions, please do get in touch via X or through Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.